Hi, I'm Melanie, and you're watching Yarn Journeys. Today's episode is my 2022 Year of Knitting in Review. So my plan for this episode is to take you through each one of my completed knitting projects, tell you what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, just get a general sense of what I learned and achieved through my knitting in 2022. We're going to go by category. So generally from smaller projects to ending with what I consider to be the bigger projects. By way of background, a few things to know about me and my knitting. So first of all, I am a bigamous knitter. And what that means is I generally only have 2 knitting projects going on at any given time. So I'll either have like one smaller project and one larger project, one project that I'm mainly working on in my home, and a smaller project that I can take with me if I'm traveling or if I'm having to spend time in a waiting room or so on. The other thing is that I don't keep unfinished objects or UFOs around. My feeling is that if a project isn't going well, if I'm losing interest in it, I'll either frog it or fix it. I just don't like that feeling of having something that's just sort of lingering around that I am not working on. So all of the projects that you're going to see today are things that I completed from January 1st through December 31st. And I use Ravelry to document my start and finish dates. So that's the scoop of what's going to be shown to you today. So grab a beverage, either a cup of tea, some coffee, some water, what have you. Grab your knitting and let's get into it. First up are some mittens. These are the Vanten Frida mittens pattern by Lovisa Joveken. I think that's how you pronounce her name. I do not know. I knit them in Kelborn Woolens Camper, which is a fingering weight yarn specifically designed for color work. I made them as a present for my sister-in-law, so I don't have them here to show you today, but I loved how these mittens turned out. They were so fun to knit. It was great to see how the face and all the details worked up as I was knitting them. Highly recommend this pattern if you're a fan of Frida Kahlo. Totally a joy. Okay, next up are hats. So the first one I have to show you is what I am calling my fuzzy Tulsi hat. So this past spring, I was taking a course in lace knitting with the School of Sweet Georgia. And one of the patterns they assigned, or sort of assigned, I mean, it's an online course. One of the patterns they offered to those who were taking the course was the Tulsi hat by Tabetha Hedrick, who is the in-house designer for Sweet Georgia. And I was in the mood to play around, so I went deep into my stash where I had some Jagger spun main line in the color apricot, and I also had some drops kid silk mohair in the color plum, and decided to put them 2 together just to see what would happen. Well, surprise, surprise, when you pair mohair with fingering, the idea that this is lace doesn't actually show up. The fuzz just totally obscures the yarn overs. But I actually think it's a pretty effect. I love how the mohair marls with a warm pink. So it was kind of a fun knit anyway. Now, here's the issue I continually have, and I'm going to put the hat on, is that, well, on camera, this probably looks like fine. It just covers my ears. But the gauge is probably a bit loose, and there is no negative ease whatsoever. And if there's even a slight wind, this thing can get blown off my head. It just doesn't stay on. So I am a loose knitter, as I may have mentioned before, and I didn't get gauge with this one. But it's still pretty, and sometimes I wear it just for fun. Next up is my Willow headband. This is a pattern put out there by King Cole Limited, which I think is a yarn manufacturer in England. I'm going to double check that. I also believe it's a free pattern on Ravelry. By the way, all the links for the patterns are going to be below in the description box. So feel free to check those out anytime. Anywho, the Willow headband pattern is a twisted seed stitch headband. I knit this up in the Drury Lane DK from Townhouse Yarns, which I bought at This Is Knit on my trip to Ireland. This Is Knit is a yarn shop in Dublin, which was just a joy to visit. The yarn is a squishy, soft cashmere merino nylon DK weight. Such a joy to have running through your fingers on your needles. I gave this as a gift to my mom, so I don't have this to show you in person. Next up is my Musselburgh-ish. I call it an ish because it's not quite knit to the pattern. And I made this with hand spun, and this is my very first knitted object made with my own hand spun. I started to get into spinning this year, which was a surprise to me. I never thought I was going to want to spin. So I am very proud of this particular completed object. The pattern that I used is Ysolda Teague's Musselburgh, which essentially it's like a tube with decreases or increases at either end, depending which you start with, and then you put one end inside the other, and you have a hat. I love this hat, not only because of the sense of achievement, but the spinning and knitting this hat made me fall in love with Targhee wool. Targhee is an American sheep breed that is based on Rambouillet with merino roots. So it's really soft, really squishy, nice and bouncy. The only issue I have with this hat is that I didn't quite have enough yarn to really complete the Musselburgh pattern. So I was playing yarn chicken as I was getting towards the end of the hat. And I wish it were just a little bit longer so that I could fold up the brim. I mean, it doesn't really work with this hat to fold up the brim, but I wore this all through my trip to Vancouver Island. It is a warm and lovely hat. I love to wear it hiking. Couldn't say enough good things about it. The next hat I'm going to share with you is also my last hat of the year, and it's the Utu Hat with the pattern by Sari Nordlund. I don't have the hat here to share with you because I made it a gift from my mom. But I took some pictures so you can see what it looks like. So the hat is knit in the Woolfolk Flet, which is a very fine merino boucle. The pattern actually calls for this yarn. And when I saw this yarn at the Magpie Fibers flagship in Frederick, they had some samples that were in color work. And I just thought it made this like beautiful, fluffy color work pattern. So I ended up buying 2 skeins, thinking that I could somehow come up with a color work hat using 2 colors of the flet. Now, when I looked on Ravelry, there aren't any hat patterns, at least that I could find, that successfully used the boucle as in the colorwork design. So what I tried to do for some time was adapt DK weight hat patterns that use 2 colors with this boucle. And I think I tried about 3 patterns. None of them came out right. The gauge was all off, or I didn't like the fabric. So I then looked at hat patterns that were specifically designed for this boucle yarn. And the Utu Hat pattern was one of those. So what I decided to do was use 1 color for the brim and 1 color for the body of the hat. This yarn is quite expensive, so I was determined to use both skeins in order to get maximum value, and the pattern called for 2 skeins, so there you have it. I think how should I say this? I think I would have liked the hat better if it were all 1 color, but 2 different colors is what I had. Let me know what you think. Do you like the 2 colors, or do you think 1 color would have been the way to go? Anyway, my mom says she very much likes the hat. So in any case, it is a super squishy, soft, warm, and delightful hat. So one thing to note, boucle is not the easiest yarn to knit with, or at least I didn't find it so. What I found particularly tricky was that boucle is hard to read as you're knitting with it. So the little loops in the yarn can disguise themselves as stitches, and particularly since even though this is DK weight yarn, the pattern called for size 2 needles. So the actual loops of the knit stitches were quite little. So sometimes I thought maybe I dropped a stitch, or I couldn't see if what I'd made was a purl stitch or a knit stitch. So I had to tink back sometimes, even when I didn't really have to, because I thought I'd made some mistakes. So I'm going to keep that in mind the next time I think I want to knit with boucle. I totally love the finished texture and pattern and the squish of the hat, but knitting with boucle is a little bit of a pain in the ass. Just saying. So next up is my Zephyret cowl, which I am super pleased with how it came out. The yarn is Flying Goat Farms Zephyret, which is a sport weight blend of Surrey alpaca, cashmere, and silk. When I visited Flying Goat Farm in one of its open studio dates, Lisa, who is the maker behind Flying Goat Farm Fibers, told me that this was like knitting with kittens, and it is. It is so, so soft and delightful. I just want to pet it. The pattern is Nat Raedwulf's Rivers and Ravens cowl, which is actually based on her inspiration from being a designer in Vancouver Island. So I played with a number of cowl patterns using color work mainly more stranded color work for a while before I landed on the River and Ravens cowl, which is a free pattern on Ravelry, by the way. This is mosaic knitting, which I think came out perfectly. I love how the pattern shimmers. It just, I don't know, I am endlessly entranced by it, and it is really soft and comfy against my neck and face. Couple things about this wool. Really, really love it. Just so soft. But as I was knitting with it, the halo kind of comes off a little bit, and I noticed that you get these sort of little donuts of fuzz that surround the strand. And so, after it accumulates for a little while, I ended up snipping it off. Not a big deal, but you should know that it just sheds just a touch as you knit. And mosaic really works with this yarn quite well. I don't recommend stranded color work for it because the yarn is super slippy and it's hard to maintain a consistent gauge. A lot of the patterns intended for this wool actually just use one color, and I am a happy girl because I have a couple more skeins worth left in this, and I'm going to keep playing with it, and I hope to buy some more in my future. So that is the Zephyret cowl. And now we commence into the parade of socks. But first, I have a little bit of fuzz on my lips. Now, the Zephyret cowl is fuzzy, and note to self, might not want to wear too sticky a lip gloss when wearing that cowl. Okay, now we're into socks. So first up are my Upspunny socks. The pattern is Ann Budd's 6 inches per inch socks that are from her Getting Started with Socks book. The wool is the Holdu socker that I bought in my trip to Iceland last year. More fuzz. Whew, got it. The yarn is, as I said, the Holdu socker that I bought at the Upspunny mini mill on my trip to Iceland when we went through Selfoss in 2021. These socks are super warm. I would say it's like a sport weight, or even maybe even a DK. Really, really thick. I love the color. I just love this fiery orangey red. Here's the problem. They are scratchy AF. I mean, I have to wear sock liners with these because when I walk around on them in my bare feet, it's a little bit like walking on sandpaper. They are a wonderful memento of my trip to Iceland, and I will always treasure them. The other thing is that I've only worn them once or twice, and they have pilled a bit on the heels where they rub in my boots. So that is something to note. However, they do seem to soften up with wear and washing, so hopefully they will get softer. I am, I'm not mad at them because they're scratchy. It's just that I have to wear sock liners, otherwise they're kind of unwearable. So my Icelandic Upspunny socks. Next up are the DRK Everyday Socks that I knit for my sister. And I participated in Andrea Mowry's DRK Spin It to Knit It sock cowl or knit along that she hosted last winter. So like I think it was February to March of 2022. I was not yet spinning, so I just wanted to knit a pair of socks and participate in a knit along. My sister does not enjoy wool socks, so the yarn is the self-striking Barocco Comfort sock, which is a blend of acrylic and nylon. I really am pleased with how these socks knit up. I have a picture of both my sister wearing them on her feet, as well as I took a picture for Ravelry. You know, without them on blockers, the socks look a bit funny and thin, but they're knit in a rib and they stretch out. And my understanding is that they fit my sister quite well. It was during participating in this cowl and seeing the spinners put their hand spun up in the Ravelry threads that I began to think, maybe I do want to try spinning. So that's where I got the impulse to spin. I really didn't think I was going to want to play with spindles and spinning wheels and all that, but that changed. Next up are my stepping stones socks. The pattern is by Clara Parks, and they're from her book, The Knitter's Book of Socks. I made these for my brother. They're knit in the Malabrigo Rios, which is a worsted weight superwash merino yarn, and is actually the yarn that Clara used in her pattern, and was sort of my first experience thinking, gee, wow, when you use the yarn that the designer used, sometimes that's actually the best result. I actually happen to have a whole bunch of Malabrigo Rios on hand, and you'll know why in a moment. Anywho, these are delightfully squishy, soft, well-fitting socks that I made for my brother. The stepping stones pattern is top down, easy to follow, highly recommend, and Clara's book, knitting The Knitter's Book of Socks, is a great read, just like all of Clara's books. I am a huge Clara Parks fan, and I have read all of her books and enjoyed them. Highly recommend. But I digress. Let's get on to the next socks, shall we? And these are the DRK everyday socks that I knit for myself. I knit these during my trip to Ireland last spring. So whenever we were hiking or out and about and my husband was doing his photography thing, I would have a seat and knit a bit on these socks. So these socks, which are one of my favorite pair of socks, and I wear frequently, I will always treasure as a memento of my trip to Ireland. The yarn is La Bien-Aimée Merino Super Sock in the color of Highgarden, which is a reference to Game of Thrones. And they are getting softer and even more delightful with the washing. So, and the yarn I bought in Paris at Lil Weasel, which is the famous Parisian yarn shop. Highly recommend. That is a delight if you ever visit Paris. So lots of good memories wrapped up in this pair of socks. So the next pair of socks I have to show you are my Hedgehog Curios. The pattern is, of course, Andrea Mowry's Curio socks, and the yarn is made, well, the yarn is Hedgehog Fibers sock yarn. When I visited Hedgehog Fibers in Cork on my trip to Ireland, I bought 2 sets of sock minis in the color, let me remind myself, heron, which is the speckled gray, and the red is called sin. And I'm such a huge fan of red, so I had to have it when I saw it. I love this Curio pattern. It's a slip stitch pattern. It was so easy and fun. Definitely what they call potato chip knitting. You knit a row, just got to keep knitting yet another row. The socks fit so well. The yarn washes and wears great. It is getting softer with every wear and wash. And this was the first time I tried an afterthought heel, which, to be honest with you, I was a bit dubious about. Essentially, with an afterthought heel, you knit the socks in a tube. You can either go toe up or cuff down, whichever you like better, and then you put a lifeline or piece of waste yarn in one row on one half of the sock, and then you come back carefully, pick up the stitches from that lifeline, and then you knit sort of another. It's almost like you knit a toe of a cuff down sock where the lifeline was, and you Kitchener the 2 sides together. It was actually surprisingly easy, and it also makes the sock fit really great. I can't wait to knit another pair of the Curio socks, and I have some yarn in mind. Now, I was playing yarn chicken with these, so the very end, the cast off of the cuff, is a purple from some deep stash. Oh, I think a truck just went by. So, and it's some German yarn that I bought a while ago. Now, one thing I noticed is that as I wash these, some of the ends are coming out, and that is something I'm going to need to fix. But love these Hedgehog Curio socks. And there are more socks to come. All right. These are what I call my Blue Ridge Hermione socks. You may be familiar with Hermione's Everyday Socks. It is one of the most popular sock patterns on Ravelry. Erica Luder is, I think that's how you pronounce the last name. She's the designer. Free pattern on Ravelry. The yarn is Mama Jess Knits in the Wildflowers colorway that I bought at Susan Yarn Stash right off of Route 81 in central western Virginia. I just love the way this yarn knit up. It's beautiful, soft, and I just love the fabric. It's so nice. I wear these socks frequently. Not a huge fan of this pattern. While free and quite popular, I don't think the pattern is actually that suitable for beginners, mainly because there are some things that are omitted in there. And had I not actually been an experienced sock knitter, I wouldn't have known what to do. So, it's always nice to find a free pattern on Ravelry, but just not one I would recommend as a first sock pattern. The other thing is that I I don't think I got the right size for my feet. They fit my feet lengthwise, but they're a bit loose. And though while I did get gauge, I don't have negative ease to begin with. So the socks on my feet kind of slide around a bit. So, but very happy with my Blue Ridge Hermione socks. And here are my Lannister Dustland socks. These are also knit with La Bien-Aimée Super Sock. This is the colorway Lannister. I talked about these socks at length in my most recent episode, I believe, because I was working on them all through my trip to Vancouver Island. The pattern is by Stephen West and is my first Stephen West pattern. Totally enjoyed knitting them. The knit purl patterns were a lot of fun, kept me interested in the sock. And the La Bien-Aimée Super Sock, it just washes and wears so nicely. They're getting softer and cozier every time I wash and wear them. Here's my issue with these socks. Because the cuff, which is doubled, is so heavy, the legs of the sock just always slip down my leg whenever I wear them. So I put them on, and then within 10 or 12 steps, the cuffs are hanging around my ankle bones, which is not a problem where I'm wearing them around my house. But if I'm out walking and wearing them in my shoes, I find it a bit annoying. I think if I were to do this over again, I might knit the legs longer and not have the heavy cuff, because I think what is happening is that the double weight of the cuff is what is actually sliding down the rest of the sock down my leg. I don't know. This Dustland sock pattern is, I think, quite popular, as are most of Stephen West's patterns. He's always in the hot right now on Ravelry. Have you knit this sock pattern? What's your experience? In fact, I'm curious to know if you've knit any of the patterns that I've knit and whether you liked how they came out as well. Please make some comments below if you've knit any of these patterns, and let me know what you think. All right, we've come to the last of this year's socks, and I myself am surprised by how many socks I knit up this year. These are the Blue Ridge Bear Paw socks. The pattern is, of course, Andrea Mowry's Bear Paw socks. It's the DK version of her everyday socks. And I knit these up for her DRK sock challenge that she hosted this past Thanksgiving. The blue yarn is Beezines in the colorway Dutch Hyacinth, and the speckled gray with blue is the Knit and Coop's BFL nylon in Patches of Speedwell is the colorway. And actually both yarns are a combination of BFL and nylon. I am very pleased with how these knit up. I actually talked about them in detail in a recent episode, one of the ones on Vancouver Island. So I'm not going to go into detail about these socks here. Very pleased. I will say that they are a bit loose around my feet. So, you know, I think one of the things I'm going to be working on in the following year is trying to get more negative ease in my socks. So I either have to adjust patterns or size down to a different circumference. because oftentimes I find that my wool knitted socks, even from the get-go, because all wool socks kind of stretch out if they don't have elastic in them as you wear them. But what often from the get-go is that they're not hugging my feet. And so that just contributes to friction as you're wearing them, and it's not as comfortable as if they hugged your foot with proper negative ease. But these are great winter weight hiking boot or keeping your feet warm around the house socks. So very happy with them. All right, we made it through the parade of socks. Thanks for sticking with me. And if you like this sort of thing, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe so that you don't miss more content from Yarn Journeys. It really does help the channel to find its audience if you hit that like button. So thanks so much. All right, on to the big stuff. And this really is something big. So this is my Miter Touch throw, or it's really a blanket. It's blanket size. And I finished this in February of 2022. I'd say it took me 10 months to complete. It's a modular knit, and it's a free pattern by Stephanie Schroeder. So each module, I guess, each thing, that's the wrong side. So let me see, hopefully you can see. The main unit in this pattern is these miter squares. So if you're unfamiliar with miter squares, you actually cast on a big, like you cast on a flat edge or pick up stitches from other squares, and as you knit up, you make two stitch central decreases, and it pulls the square into a diamond shape. There's over 300 squares, I believe, and this was a very long project. And what I did is I started in 2021 and I knit through into 2022 about 1 square a night while watching TV. And you know, this pattern taught me the power of stick-to-itiveness. It was very tempting to just put it aside and take a break. Once I knew how to knit a square, it was just very easy to keep replicating one square after another square. And you start at the bottom and you just make your way up to the top. Actually, you make your way diagonal. So you start at one corner. I'm trying to figure out which end is which. Aha, I think this is the bottom. So you start with one square, and then you just knit. It's such a big thing. It's hard to show, but you just knit diagonally along, yeah, one square a night while watching TV over the course of several months. What was really nice about it as it got bigger is that it could serve its purpose as a throw to put over your legs while watching TV and knit at the same time. So that was kind of fun. It may have mentioned this already. It's knit in Malabrigo Rios. So it has that characteristic squish and stretch that yarn is famous for. And I had enough left over to knit my brother a pair of socks, which you have already seen. Will I ever knit a big modular blanket or throw like this one? No. Probably not. Shawls. So the first shawl I knit this year is my night shift, which is a famous shawl pattern by Andrea Mowry, of course. The yarn is Julie Asselin Lezu DK, which is a merino silk blend. This was the first project with which I ever did mosaic knitting. And I really enjoyed it. It was a delight to knit. I love the colors. It's made with 6 different skeins or 6 different colorways. I didn't write down what they were, but anyway, 6 skeins. You can look it up on my Ravelry page if you want to, which is linked in the description below. Here's my issue with this shawl. It is really beautiful, but I didn't actually get the correct gauge, and it's not actually a great shape. I'm not happy with it. It looks okay if I just sort of wrap it around my neck, but it doesn't quite cover my shoulders. I think while I may have gotten the stitch gauge correct, I didn't get row gauge, and the triangle is too deep and the shawl isn't that wide. So I actually use it as a decoration here or there. Like I'll drape it across the back of the couch. You'll sometimes see that in my videos, but and sometimes I wear it tightly around my neck. But I'm not going to frog it. It's still really pretty and I like it a lot. And my second shawl that I knit this year is Andrea Mowry's Birds of a Feather. Now this thing is ginormous. It has quite the opposite problem of the night shift. I am not going to be able to get the whole thing on camera. I love this shawl. I bought the yarn at Le Petit Point Parisien, which is a delightful yarn shop at the bottom of the Montmartre Hill in Paris. If you are in Paris, I highly recommend you stop by. The owner of the shop hand-dyed this beautiful speckled gray and purple yarn. This is her mohair silk blend, and this is her merino silk lace weight. So I wear this all the time. It is very elegant. It is very fuzzy and warm when you tie it around your neck. It can be, it's a lot of shawl, so styling it requires some time to make sure you're not dragging it behind you. But I made this for Andrea Mowry's March to May knit along, which I look forward to participating in again. So, and whenever I wear it, I always remember my trip to Paris. So, whew. Okay, I need to stop petting this and move on. Sweaters. So I made 2 sweaters this year. The first is my Curdock cardigan. The pattern is by Carol Feller, and the yarn is Carol's Blasta yarn, which is made especially for her by Donegal Yarns in the colorway Breac. It is, of course, a cable knit cardigan, and I learned a lot by knitting this sweater, particularly in construction. And I've talked a bit about how this sweater is constructed in my Ireland videos. But I am super pleased with this sweater. It fits. I've always wanted sort of an Irish cable knit sweater, and my first attempt really didn't work out so well. I wear this all the time. I love it. And I particularly love the buttons, which I hope you can see. They go with this cardigan perfectly. Super pleased. And I love the color. Carol picked this for me, by the way, when I visited her Stolen Stitches studio in Cork. And if you're ever in Ireland, I highly recommend that you drop by. Is there anything I don't like about this sweater? Well, to be honest, the round neckline is just not my favorite. It's not the round neckline is just not the most flattering on me. So I tend to wear it with either a turtleneck or a collared shirt underneath, because that is just a bit more flattering. And the buttons are probably a bit too heavy, and they kind of pull and create this scalloped look to the button band. But I just love the buttons with this yarn, and I'm living with it because I think I like it too much to change. So, Curdock cardigan, I treasure you. Love it. And my second sweater and final finished object I'm going to talk about today is what I'm wearing, which is my hand-spun weekender. So this past July, Andrea Mowry, whom you know by now, I am a huge fangirl of, hosted or kicked off her DRK Spin It to Knit the Weekender. And I jumped in with both feet, new spinner that I am. So I bought a whole bunch of 100% Targhee hand-dyed yarn from Julie Spins on Etsy. Spent the summer spinning it into what I thought was worsted weight yarn, because the Weekender is based on Brooklyn Tweed's Shelter, which is a Targhee blend worsted weight. It ended up being more Aran bulky, because Targhee really poofs in the finish, but that's okay. What I ended up doing was knitting a smaller size than would typically fit me, and that's what worked perfectly. I am super happy with this sweater. I love the colorway. I love the yarn is super soft to the touch, yet it's quite sturdy, partly because what they call the grist, which is the yards per pound of fiber, is a bit dense. It's also quite warm, and I'll be honest that as soon as this video is done filming, I'll probably be taking it off. Anywho, it is exactly the kind of sweatshirt, comfy sweater that I was hoping I would end up with. So totally got some fuzz there. Anyway, totally love it. I guess that one of the things is that the boat neck, it stretches pretty far down the shoulders, and I might not be so in love with the neckline, but that is the only quibble I have with this sweater, and that is a minor thing. So this sweater truly got me into hand spinning, and I can't wait to see what I'll make next with my spinning. So stay tuned and you'll find out along with me. All right, so I thought I would, after going through all of these knits that I finished in 2022, I thought I would tell you what are my top 5. What are the 5 completed objects that I am the most pleased with? So, in descending order towards my most favorite, first has to be my miter touch, blanket throw, what have you, because I use it almost every day, so it's well loved, it's super pretty, and it definitely wins on that daily use criteria. Plus, I look at it as my touchstone to, yes, Melanie, you can complete things over the long term, because this project was a testament to stick-to-itiveness. Next up are my hedgehog socks, because they are so fun. They remind me of my trip to Ireland. I love the colors and they fit my feet. So this is my most successful sock pattern of the year. Next is my birds of a feather shawl, because I just like petting it, and it reminds me of a romantic trip to Paris, and it is super elegant when I wear it. Not when it's mushed up in a ball like this, but it's just super pretty. Then I'd have to say is my Curdock cardigan, because it is so nice to have a well-constructed sweater that fits. And it was such a joy to knit. And it is a delightful reminder of my trip to Ireland. And finally, my favorite finished object of 2022 has to be my weekender sweater that I'm wearing right now, because it represents me learning so much. I learned to spin. I learned to spin for a sweater. I learned how to do tubular cast-ons and tubular bind-offs. Plus, it could have been a big dud sweater, which was something that I feared, because I was like, it's hand spun, it's not that consistent, it could be really fugly, but at least I'll learn something. Well, I learned something, and I also think it's really beautiful, if I do say so myself. So I am quite satisfied. So satisfied. So tell me, what's your favorite completed object of 2022? I want to know, what makes you feel that something is a big achievement in knitting? What are you most proud of this year? Tell me in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. So that's all, folks. That's all the things I knit up in 2022. In my next episode, we'll talk about what's on deck for 2023. We'll go through my hopes and goals for my knitting and crafting in the coming year. So please do stay tuned and subscribe if you'd like to make sure that you don't miss any upcoming episodes for Yarn Journeys, because I've got some plans for 2023. Once again, please do hit the like button if you enjoyed watching this episode, and I look forward to catching you in the next one. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.